problems, and just answering questions. Now, where in our case are we going to find the lecture material? I'm going to share my screen here so I can show you guys where the content for today's lecture is. Can you guys see this ed page? Is this working? Okay, great. So if you'll see here, I'm in ed. If you go to the lessons tab, you'll see here week 3. I can't believe it's week 3 already. You'll see lecture 7, JS events plus template and classes. If you click that, it will actually take you to some nice videos that I've put together. I think they're nice, that cover basically what's covered in the lecture slides, but broken up into about 10-minute chunks. So there's some JS events, a little discussion of the template file, and also practice with DOM manipulation. And there's also some practice questions there available for you guys to do that kind of expands on the information that is in the video. Now, if I apologize, the first time I put that together, I actually called those quiz questions. That was a mishap. Somebody asked if those were graded. They're not graded. They're just there for your benefit to check out and make sure that you understand some of the information that is in the videos. So that is how lecture material is going to be presented this week. We'll see if you guys like that. If not, we can always switch back to more of a lecture style, but we'll give this a shot and see how it goes. So quickly, just some reminders. Homework 1 is due Wednesday by 11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. CP2 is going to be released tomorrow. CP1 and Quiz 1 grade solutions will be released later this week. I am not going to answer any quiz related questions today in class. If you have any questions about the quiz, you can always drop by the instructor office hours Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right after lecture. And just for everyone's information, this is on the syllabus, but we will drop the lowest quiz grade of the 5. So if you miss one and you make the remaining 4, missing one quiz will not impact your grade. So hopefully that is useful information for everyone. So these are the slides. Again, these are linked to in the ed lesson down here at the bottom. So this is how you can find the slides for today. I am noticing that I know I put this lesson up at about 7 o'clock yesterday, maybe. Not even a third of the class has looked at any of this material. So just as a little, I guess just to give you guys a little mercy here, I am going to quickly go over these slides just to give you context for what we're going to be doing for a little bit of practice with this today. Again, I am going to fly through these slides. Everything is discussed in videos in the ed lesson in detail. And again, there are questions there to help you test your understanding. Basically, Fitz went over a lot about how to listen for events in JavaScript. Very simply, we can call a function in response to an event on an element. We use add event listener to do that. So for example, if I had a box button, I could add a click listener to that box button and call open box in response. Typically, one of the biggest errors we see is that students invoke the callback function when passing it to add event listener. Make sure you don't do that, and you just refer to the function by name. We already saw that you can add singular event listeners to elements, but you can actually apply multiple event listeners to an element. And one of the examples I showed in the video was this Launchpad example. And so just as we can add event listeners, we can also remove them as well. The function signature is identical to add event listener. We can simply just pass in the event name, and then the function or the callback that was previously attached that we are going to remove. And then in the videos, I also went over event objects. These are created by the browser when an event occurs. It has a lot of information about the event and a lot of properties on the event object, such as when it occurred, what the event type was, and then it also can give you a reference to the element that the event listener has been attached to. And the browser is really nice. It passes this event object to our callback function automatically. We just need to define this parameter here in our callback function. And there are a bunch of different types of events. MDN has an exhaustive list. You're probably very interested in load, click, double click, mouse over. Some pretty common ones you'll use, but there, again, there's a giant list of these events that you can listen for on MDN. One of the next things I discussed is a JavaScript template file that we'll be using for all of our assignments going forward. Fitz has already discussed a lot of the components of this skeleton file, but just quickly to go over them, there's 4 parts. We have strict mode. Strict mode turns some silent errors in JavaScript into explicit errors. It will actually throw an error in the console. One of the most common silent errors in JavaScript is assigning a value to an undeclared variable. If you add useStrict to the top of your JavaScript file, it will actually throw an error whenever you try to do that. If you don't have useStrict at the top of your file, that error will pass silently and you won't be notified of it. So make sure you add useStrict at the top of all of your files, and if you use the JavaScript template that's provided for you, that will already be there. Again, the module pattern, we saw this already. If we wrap our statements in an anonymous function, we can actually prevent our code from having a global scope. We don't pollute the global namespace, and we can also prevent our code from being accessed or modified externally. And finally, everybody should be very, very familiar with the window load event from the quiz. We wait to execute any further code until the load event has fired, because this lets us know that the DOM has loaded and that external resources such as style sheets and images are now available and accessible from our JavaScript code. And then finally, you'll see some really nice shortcut functions that are defined in the JavaScript template for you that are like ID, QSA, query selector, that are there to replace query selector all, query selector, and get element by ID. It just makes it a lot easier. It's a lot less to type. And as I said, all of this is provided for you in a nice JavaScript template here. And you can use this as the basis for your JavaScript programs going forward. You can see a lot of these helper functions are already here. We have our add event listener, and also we already have useStrict and the module pattern. Finally, we've already seen DOM manipulation with text, but we can actually manipulate the classes on our HTML elements. And one of the reasons we do this is because we can hide and show elements this way. Currently, we know how to do this statically by adding a class to an element and then adding a rule set in our CSS style sheet. Say for, we give it a class hidden, and we'd have this rule display none. Now, we can do this dynamically in JavaScript one way, which is by editing the style attribute of our HTML elements directly. And so this allows us to set CSS styles from our JavaScript on HTML elements. But what's wrong with that? Well, we want to maintain a separation of our content, behavior, and style. If we use this method, the style.display or just the element.style interface, we're going to be writing CSS in our JavaScript files, and we don't want that. So what would we prefer to do? We would prefer to add and remove classes on our JavaScript, on our HTML elements. And by doing that, we can change the style of our elements simply by adding and removing class names. there is a interface for manipulating classes on our HTML elements that's called class list. This is an object that is available on every HTML element, and it has these nice functions provided for us. Add a class name, remove a class name, check if one is contained on that element. And also the class list allows us to access all of the classes on an HTML element in more of a array or list fashion. And although I did show this in the video, I'm just, because it is so important and it is new, the newest content, I'm going to just play around with class list in the console really quickly before we get on to an exercise. And so here, I can access the body element of an HTML page just by doing document.body. Now I can access the class list with class list, and I can add, let's say, my class. Now, before I hit enter on that, I just want to show you up here, there is no class attribute on my body element. I can just do add class here, and you can see I add one on class, or excuse me, add the my class to body. Maybe I wouldn't necessarily want to do add a class on the body. That wouldn't be the best idea. I can also do, say, just on our main tag. See here, let me set that as a variable and see what happened there. Okay, we have class list dot add my, yeah, I forgot the add there. Thank you very much. My class, and you can see I add my class to the main element. And I can just as easily remove that using remove, and you can see it's gone. And then if I were to run contains on my class, you can see false. It's not on the main element anymore. And I can also do the toggle function, which every time I call it, it just goes, it adds it and removes it each time based on whether or not it's there. Okay, so that is all the content that I covered in this ed lesson. Again, ideally, what I would like to do is put up those videos and those quizzes and then just go straight into a practice problem. I know this is new for all of us and we're kind of switching it up. I know some of you may not have seen the ed announcement. So that's why I just wanted to go through that content again. Luckily, there's not too much new today except for class list. But in the future, we'll try to jump right into a practice problem. So today, we're actually going to be working on an example that I hope to build on over the next week or week and a half. And it's this interactive Skittles kind of counting Skittles in a jar game people might be familiar with from, I don't know, elementary school or so. And what this game does is when I hit start, it populates a random number of Skittles of various colors in this jar. It chooses a random color for you to guess. And you can actually enter a value here guessing the number of Skittles in this jar. So if I enter 25 here, I hit guess, it says it's a little low. Let me try 35. Still a bit low, but I can keep guessing and eventually I'll get it right and it'll let me know that I got it right. And if I reset, I can choose the number of colors that I want in my container, and I can keep guessing. Now, this is what we're eventually going to build over the next week and a half, but we're actually going to focus on more of a smaller subset of this and eventually build on that and get to that final output. So today here, what you're seeing is just a subset of the features that we're going to be implementing. So we're going to assume that we only want to count green Skittles in our jar. And we're going to have a little bit of a different interface. So when we hit give me the answer, we're going to just count the number of green Skittles and output it to the screen in a message that we are going to change from being hidden to not hidden. So this is actually something that I have set up in Ed as well that you all can follow along with. This is how I hope to do these exercises for the next 5 lectures. So if you actually go into Ed again, and you go to the Lessons tab, I'll go back here just so we can see the lessons. There's Lecture 7 Skittles. And if you click on Lecture 7 Skittles, you'll actually see I have all of the starter code here set up for you, the HTML file, the JavaScript, and the Skittles.css. If I click on Enable Web View, I actually see the output of these files. And I can update these in real time. And as I make changes, this page, this web preview will update. So you guys can follow along as I do this. I am going to give you guys a minute to get this set up. And we'll try going through a few of these steps of adding this functionality to the page. Specifically, we're going to add some event listeners. We'll practice using document.querySelectorAll, and we'll add or remove classes using class list. Now, if you're looking at Skittles, the JS here, we're going to be doing parts 1 through 3, and we'll work up to these other parts over the course of lecture in the next 2 weeks. Now, has anybody been able to get this open? Has anybody opened this, have this on their computer? Okay, cool, great, awesome. So some things you might want to turn on in your editor here. If you click this little settings tool button here, the cog, the gear, you can add some nice things that you might want, like highlight the active line. I like that quite a bit. And I'm also going to turn on the linter highlight errors. I actually don't know for a fact if that works, but hopefully it does. It'll help me catch things like missing the add function there or capitalizing the L in class list in my video. So once we have this here set up, I can actually full screen this. And hopefully that looks a little bit nicer for you guys. Can people see this pretty clearly? Is it too small? Should I make it? It's a little small. Do you want me to make it? Okay. All right. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit here. Skittles jar is cut off. It is cut off for me. More fits. Should I do a little more? A little more? How about that? Okay. All right. Well, the Skittles jar is going to be cut off. Thankfully, we're just adding behavior, and I can sort of move this up and down a little bit. Hopefully, that'll be good enough. We'll deal with this for the time being. So before I start on 1.1, which is writing our event listener here, can anybody tell me just how I might want to verify that this code is even running, that this JavaScript was executed on this page? What's a really easy way for me to do that, to verify that? Okay, yeah, print to the console. I think that was the first thing, my inclination when I was putting together this Ed lesson. I had never used this before, and I was like, wow, okay, is this actually running? Okay, so I'll console log this. Does this work? Question mark. Now, where is this output, though? I actually don't see this anywhere. Well, it actually is in the console of the actual browser. There's not a nice console output for this web preview. So if you just go ahead and open up the actual console, that took me out of full screen, but it shouldn't. 1 second here. Okay, so everybody can see both my screen and the console? Okie dokie. So let's go ahead and clear the ed there. And now if I go over here and enable the web preview, and you can see here I have the does this work console statement. So we can see that this code is actually running. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and actually do part 1.1 here. And what event listener am I looking for here? Okay, Aman says load, and that is correct. And I will add that. And we're going to call the init function. And this is complaining because it's refreshing every time I type a letter. So hopefully this isn't actually the case. But once again, let's see if I reload this here manually. So I think this is fine. But once again, we can check to see if the init function actually is getting called here. So I'll do another console log. But the question, does single versus double quote matter around load? No, it does not. You can use single or double quotes. Either is fine. And so again, I'm just going to do another console log here just to make sure that init works. Let's see here. Let me reload this page. And you see here, I get out to the console, init. I know the init function works. That is awesome. So maybe I'll just leave that console log there. It just gives me a little peace of mind. Next here, we've got, we want to add a click listener to our start button. We already have one on our answer button. If I look over here in the HTML and I scroll down, sorry guys, I keep scrolling with the mouse pad and it does not like that. Okay, so let me try to do this without the mouse pad and going back and forth. If I go down here, I have the two buttons in the HTML, the start button, ID start button, and then the answer button, answer dash button. And so I want to add click listeners to both of those. Here we already have one on the answer button, which calls show answer. Show answer is the actual behavior that we want to implement today. So this button here. But we're also eventually going to populate the function that gets called when we click start, which is fill jar. And fill jar is empty right now. We will populate it coming up. But just for the sake of completeness here, we will just go ahead and add the event listener to the start button. Go ahead, add this here. Call this our start button. And then I'm just going to do console logs in both of my show answer functions and my fill jar just to make sure that everything is hooked up correctly. Now, hopefully, go ahead and clear this. And I click this refresh here. It should have already happened. But if I hit start, Okay, I see the fill jar message, and if I click give me the answer, I get the show answer function. So everything is working just how we expected. Does anybody have any questions about what we've done so far? Okay, cool. So the next part we're going to do is the behavior on the give me the answer, the show answer button. And I will just go back quickly to our little image here of what happens when we click give me the answer. We just get the number of green Skittles currently present in the jar. Again, we're not going to be doing the start behavior today. We will do that next lecture. Today, we just want to figure out the number of green Skittles in our jar. So I'm just curious, for the people who are following along, have you been able to add these click listeners and get this working? Awesome, cool. So the next part here, we're actually going to go down into show answer and do these 3 steps here. So the first one that we want to do is write the statement to get all green Skittles. So we already know a few functions to use to access HTML elements. We have get element by ID, query selector all, query selector. But I need to know what my green Skittles look like. How can I access the Skittles in this jar? Well, it appears here we have these hard-coded Skittles in our HTML file that have 2 classes, Skittle and then the color of the Skittle. So can somebody, either in the chat or if they want to turn on their mic, it's totally fine, suggest a way for me to get an element with those class names? I'm seeing a lot of different answers here. Let's see. So one of the confusing things, so I'll go ahead and I'll do the one that I'm currently seeing. So I'm going to print out I'm seeing what? Dot Skittle. And I'm seeing a lot of Skittle green. Okay. So I'm gonna try this one out. And I'm just gonna go ahead and console log my Skittles. And let's see what happens here. I'm gonna clear the console, click give me the answer. I get this node list of nothing. It's empty. So my dot green or my dot Skittle green isn't correct. What am I missing with just the green? Missing the period here to indicate that it would be a class, right? Okay, so I could do this and click give me the answer again, but I'm still getting an empty list here. But I have my 2 class names. So why isn't this working if I have my 2 class names? Yes, I'm seeing the answer. There shouldn't be a space between the dot Skittle and the dot green. If you want to select an element with multiple class names, you actually put them together like this. Dot Skittle, dot green. Okay, and if I hit give me the answer here, wow, see, I get this node list with all of my green Skittles. Alternatively, I also could have just done dot green here. Let me just clear this. And I would get the same thing. I may have shown this a little quickly, but we know it has multiple class names just from looking in the HTML file. Again, I'm sorry, I kind of been switching back and forth pretty quickly. But you can see here all of the Skittles in our jar have the Skittle class and has the color associated with it. And using those two selectors, I mean, we can just use .green, but we can also use .skittle, .green to select elements with both of those class names. Actually, there is one more element with class green, but is not a Skittle. You are correct. Color green span. Who said Apollo? Thank you for mentioning that. Where is this guy? Span green. Oh, right here. How many class green? Okay, that's awesome. Great catch. So in this case, we would actually need to add in the Skittle class to make sure that we're only getting Skittles and not also the span element that is listed here on the right-hand side at the top of my node list. So great, thank you, Apollo. I appreciate you pointing that out. Does anybody have any questions about that part before I go on to the next one? Okay, so the next part is going to be updating the text content of the count element. And the count element down here is in this message that we want to display when a user clicks give me the answer button. And so what we want to first do is get the number of Skittles that we have and then update the text content of this span with the number of Skittles that we have. So the first thing I'm going to do is get to the count of my Skittles. I'll just put it in a variable called count. I'll do Skittles.length. I'll log that out just because. And now if I click, give me the answer here. Actually, let me clear my console. Give me the answer. I get 17 Skittles here. Now I want to get my count element. And I can do this by ID count. And then from here, I can set the text of the count element to be, I always want to invoke it, but it is not a function. And I can just text, not text element either. It's content equals our count. Okay. Now, does anybody see a potential problem here? Okay, so count is an integer. This is correct. So, but my text content is a string. So what, I mean, who thinks that it's going to cause an error if I try to set my text content to an integer? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of options here for adding an empty string. Somebody said I don't, it'll be fine. What does adding an empty string to an integer do? What is that known as? We're typecasting. So hopefully you guys have gone through and read the full intro to JavaScript lecture and also done the readings. One of the really interesting features of JavaScript is some implicit typecasting that can go on. And you can see here, for example, if I take a number and I add an empty string to it, it actually automatically converts my integer into a string here. So if I were to do, let's say, 5 plus 2, I would actually get the string 52. Okay, something else we could do is, let's say I can set my number equal to 2, and I can actually do my number 2 string and get 2. But in this particular case, we don't need to do either of those things. The browser is really nice to us and will do this type conversion for us. It will count our integer into a string already. So if let's just go ahead and console log our count element. And if I click, give me the answer, you can see here I have my actual count element printed out in a nice format in the console with the text 17. So we actually didn't need to do any type conversion or casting on our own. The browser did that for us. So now the final part that I want to do here, and I'm trying to use the mouse pad to no avail, is I want to show the paragraph tag that this is actually in. And so if I look here, my paragraph tag on line 67 exists within this article with the ID of gameplay. It currently has the class hidden. If I go over into the CSS here, I can see that I hopefully have a hidden class, I would imagine, somewhere down here, hidden, display none. So if I remove the hidden class, I should reset my paragraph tag back to its initial display value, which is going to be block. So let's go back here and let's get that paragraph element. So let p equal document.query selector. Can somebody give me the query selector for getting this paragraph tag out of the article? Somebody want to suggest that? How do I get what is the selector for this paragraph tag? I may have misspoken there. Sorry. I want to just dot hidden. Okay, I see what's going on. Okay. There might be multiple hidden elements on the page or classes or elements with the hidden class. So how can we be more specific than that? I'm seeing p dot hidden. That's could be good. We don't know. We might hide other paragraph elements on the page. The one I think that I like, maybe not like the best, but I think is the most targeted and is specific to the paragraph tag on line 67, is using the gameplay ID and then the descendant operator to get this paragraph tag. So let's go ahead and try this here. A lot of the ones that are in the chat right now would also work, but this is going to give us the most specific selector for that element. And now I'm going to finally get to manipulating the class list here. And I want to remove the class hidden. I'm not going to do dot hidden. I just want to do hidden. And hopefully this works. Somebody can correct me if this doesn't, but hopefully I hit give me the answer. Oh, and there it is. Okay, great. Just below the fold of the page, there are 17 Skittles in the jar. Fantastic. Awesome. Thanks for your help, everybody. Jeremy asks, I thought spaces indicate another selector. I'm not sure I understand the question there. If you could just elaborate a little bit more, that would be helpful.
Sure. I guess what I mean is, so like before we said, um, we didn't say, what was the example? Like before we didn't say, when we were selecting two classes, we didn't say Skittle space green, because I thought the reason that that messes up is it's saying like, um, just like it would in CSS, like that you're saying apply this to Skittles and apply this to greens separately. So I just assumed that anytime we were doing like a query selection that we wouldn't have spaces unless we were like, how does, I'm a bit confused about how spaces seem okay sometimes and not others, um, in
Yeah.
CSS and JavaScript.
Yeah, so the space actually, if you have two different selectors separated by a space, so let's say, the dot Skittle space dot green, the space indicates a parent-child relationship. So if I had a space between the dot Skittle and the dot green, that implies any element with the class green inside of or contained by an element with the class dot Skittle.
Okay.
And so if I don't have a space there, if I have the dot Skittle dot green, which we had above, that indicates one element with two classes. So the space is really important in a CSS selector because it indicates that parent-child relationship.
Got it. So then when you're using the like arrow, which is just like, I think like it's a one generational parent-child relationship, right? Can
Yeah.
you either do that without spaces or with spaces?
Um, I
Or I
actually,
guess what's proper to do it how you did it?
you definitely want it with spaces. I don't know if it would, first of all, it'd be easier to read with spaces. I actually don't even know if it would work without spaces. We can just try it really quickly.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, it looks like it's still, I'm gonna just reload this to make sure that wasn't there. Yeah, so that works, but and for readability, we really want those spaces on either side. But it is a little confusing because the space by itself is almost in a selector, right? Because it does indicate that child-parent relationship. But in this case, this right arrow is the descendant selector, and we can put spaces on either side of that.
Got it.
Cool. So I'm just looking through some of these questions here. Can't we just squeeze the dot query selector with the remove function? Yeah, so like example, Aaron, you're saying like I could combine lines 29 and 30. Is that what you're indicating?
Yeah, I guess one question was just that, like, is that like a convention that we follow? Because like, kind of in the other examples, like the TAs and the professors kind of went over it that way too, where you like set up a variable where you have like, I guess like I don't know what you call it, identifiers are put into a variable before you put it into like a function.
Yeah, if I needed to use my element again, it would be nice to have it as its own separate variable. However, if I know, for example, that I am never going to do anything else with this paragraph element, then I could just shorten this, as you were saying, to QSA, and then remove this, right? I could just do this and this is perfectly fine. I have no intention of using that paragraph tag again. And so this is perfectly acceptable. And with our shorthand functions like QSA prevents this line from going over 100 characters and makes it still readable. So that's totally fine. It's also totally fine if you're not going to be using the paragraph tag again to leave it as its own element. It might be logically easier for some people to do it in those steps. Sometimes I know it's easier for me to do that. I access it and then I do something with that element after I've accessed it. It's kind of up to you what you want to do. Either way is fine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Should this say there are 17 Skittles in the jar? Let's see. Should it have said the color in our example? I don't think it does in this particular one. The final one, I don't think it does either. So I don't think we have that behavior. Jia Rong asks, what's the difference between remove.hidden and remove hidden? So we actually don't need the period indicates a class. With the period, that would be a CSS class selector. But in this case, since we already know we're referring to classes, we don't need to add the period there. We can just do the class name, which is hidden. What does the count element variable do? The count variable, are you talking about lines 23 or 24, Nikhil? Talking about, I'm assuming 2024. This is accessing the span here.
24, line 24.
Line 24, okay, yeah. So this is accessing the span element here that we want to insert the number of Skittles into. So because it has the ID count, I accessed it using a document.getElement by ID. And then with that, I manipulated the text content. I set the text to that equal to the number of Skittles.
I see, thank you.
Yep. Would toggle work as well, or would we want it permanently hidden? In this case, we're not toggling the message on and off. We're simply just unhiding the answer with our button click there. So there are certain circumstances where you want to switch back and forth between adding and removing a class, which is what you use toggle for. But here we're just removing the class. But as we do add in more functionality to this, we will be showing some messages and hiding others using both add and remove. Can we access our code after lecture? Yeah, what is in the ed lesson is actually available for you guys. This is your code. It'll save it. You can come back to it. Oh my gosh. Yes, yes. Line 29 needs to be QS, not QSA, because I am actually accessing only one element. If I had QSA there, it would return a node list, and this is one of the common errors that we had in the lecture slides. And there is actually not a class list function or object on a node list, so this would have thrown an error. Thank you, Connor. Kellen asks if count line 23 and 24 are separate. They are. This was just probably my poor variable naming. So this could be num, and I can just change this to be number. One refers to the actual length of my node list or the number of Skittles, and count element refers to that span element with the ID of count. Instead of remove hidden, could we use JavaScript to change display none in CSS to show the paragraph? So as we showed in the lecture slide, there is a way that you can change the style attribute on an HTML element and write CSS styles directly. But this is mixing of our behavior and our style, and we don't want to do that. We want to keep our CSS rules in our style sheet and just stick to manipulating class names using class list. Do you have the solution for these practices as well? For this example that we're working on, no, because we're going to be building it all together. You can see the full working version from the slides if you would like, but we're going to be building on this throughout the next couple of lectures. So we are actually over time. I am going to stay and answer these last questions here. Fitz and I have office hours right after this, so you can come to those as well. There's also a ton of WPL hours, but I do hope that everybody found this to be a useful format because we're going to be doing this for the next week or so. Yeah, that's it. Thanks, everybody.